All right, 76ers fans, great news. Playoff P is activated. Paul George has, I don't think completely canceled, but shut down his podcast, at least for the remainder of this season. I'll get started by saying I'm not a Paul George hater. I'm not making a bunch of segments about how Paul George sucks and this and that. Personally, I don't think the podcast is really a problem so much for himself or other players. The players do have free time. They can go make a podcast in their free time. He's probably shooting at, I don't know, 9, 10 at night. It's not like 24 hours of their day are completely dedicated to the team and they have no free time whatsoever in their day. If Paul George was having off time and riding dirt bikes and stuff and going ATVing and just doing like skydiving every day or just doing crazy risky stuff and I was a team, then I'd be like, okay, come on, PG, you're gonna hurt yourself out there. You know what I mean? Stop jumping off dirt bike ramps or you know what I mean, whatever it is if it was dangerous. But podcasting, you have free time. All the players have free time, believe it or not, outside of the game, and they can go shoot a podcast, and it's not a big deal for me. With that being said, on the other side of things, I think it's dumb to shoot a podcast right in the middle of the season. Paul George, Draymond Green, these other types of players. It's like, yes, you are an NBA player. You know more about basketball than myself and the average fans. But with that being said, if you start reporting on something, reporting on a game, I saw it on Jeff Teague's podcast today. Just because y'all are in the NBA, when you report on a game, don't talk about the game and act like you watched it because we're going to know you didn't watch it. If someone actually watched the game and they're watching Paul George, Jeff Teague, whoever it is on their podcast, and they're trying to break down a game as if they watched it, we're going to know y'all didn't watch the game. You know what I mean? Just because you're an ex-NBA player doesn't mean you can just feed us crap and we're not going to know, if that makes sense. If y'all have seen some of these guys talk about games, they're like this and that happened in this game. They're just talking about highlight moments and stuff you could have got in 3 minutes from watching the post game highlights. So that frustrates me when players try to talk about, oh, I know so much about the game. I'm an ex-player or a current player, and it's like, bro, you didn't even watch the game you're talking about. I can tell you didn't. Back to Paul George though, was one of my favorite players when he was in Indiana. To be honest, doing 360 windmill dunks in game, having crazy playoff battles with LeBron, the Cavs, the Heat, hitting crazy game-winning shots and just all sorts of clutch shots earlier in his career. If y'all remember, Paul George was like, you would think him as like one of the most clutch players in the NBA, honestly, when he was in Indiana. But that's all washed away. He gets to LA. Um, then he goes to Philadelphia. He made his announcement on his podcast, of course. I'm not going to play the clip so I don't get copyrighted, but he's saying basically, oh, guys, this season's not going how we hoped, of course, blah, blah, blah. We're not doing good. I'm going to shut down the podcast for the remainder of the season so I can focus on basketball. He looks in the camera and says some heartfelt message to the Philadelphia fans. Hey guys, I came to Philadelphia. The only reason I came to Philadelphia was just to win the city a championship. I love Philadelphia. I didn't come here for to get that fourth year on my contract and get this supermax deal. That had nothing to do with it. The Clippers just disrespected me because they didn't see what a hard working guy I am and how great I keep myself in shape and just that Mamba Kobe Bryant killer mentality I have. So Paul George said, man, Clippers disrespected me, wouldn't give me a 4-year supermax. Now I got it in Philadelphia, and look at me on the back end of my contract, just playing like crap. All these podcast issues. Paul George is not the number one reason the 76ers are doing bad. I would blame Joel Embiid way before podcast P, playoff P. But you know what I mean? If you're doing a podcast in the middle of the season like Draymond, Paul George, these types of players, then like I said again, I'm not mad at you for doing a podcast. Do a podcast. It's interesting to hear the players' points of views and stuff. But it's better when you're a retired player doing a podcast because when you're a current player like Paul George, Draymond Green, whoever else it is doing a podcast, you're going to censor yourself in some way because you still work for the NBA. If you say something crazy on the podcast, your coach, whoever it is, they're going to come to you, you know what I mean, and say, you can't be saying this, you can't be doing this, whatever it is. So you're going to get a censored opinion from the player, of course, because they can't say 100% what they're thinking. And if they do, I don't think Paul George says 100% what he's thinking on his podcast. But you're going to say some things and people are going to bring it up and they're going to say you look stupid, and that's what we're doing with Paul George. So, you know what I mean? If you want to have the podcast, then put your stuff online on YouTube. I have no problem with that. I'm on YouTube. I put stuff online, basketball related stuff. And if I say something stupid, someone's gonna say, "Man, that's a stupid ass take. Why did you say that?" And I don't get all butthurt about it. I just look at it and say, "Man, this person disagreed with what I'm saying. Not everyone's gonna agree with me. Not everyone's gonna like me. It is what it is." But with Paul George, it's just like, "Oh man, you don't agree with this. You don't agree with every single thing I say. I don't think my podcast is entertaining. Boo boo hoo." It's like, bro, just like you're doing right now, just shut it down. You should never have a podcast as an active player unless you can take the heat in the kitchen. You know what I mean? Draymond Green says a bunch of, I'll say, ridiculous stuff. I don't know. You can agree with it or not agree with it on his podcast. He says a bunch of crazy shit, and Draymond doesn't really care. He just kind of rolls with the punches. Warriors know who he is. He's already talking shit all game long. So you see him on his podcast, and it's not much different. Like, that's the real Draymond Green. Where Paul George goes on and tries to like appease people. It's like he's almost walking on eggshells and trying to make sure this person's happy and this side's happy. I'm gonna stay right in the middle of things. And again, it's like, bro, people don't mind if you have a podcast. Myself personally, I think it's cool when active players have a podcast because it's cool to hear their viewpoints. Again, it's gonna be censored viewpoints because you're still in the NBA. That's why it's cooler when it's like, Gilbert Arenas, Carmelo Anthony, some of these other retired players having their podcasts. And, they'll say a bunch of crazy clickbait stuff, at least in Gilbert Arenas' case. But you can go on there, you can agree or disagree with what they're saying, but at least they're not saying stuff with, Philadelphia in the back of their mind or whatever team is hiring them because they're retired players. So when Paul George is talking, again, he's he's walking on eggshells. He's not going to say everything he really thinks for the most part, because he has to keep in mind that he can't rustle feathers with Philadelphia's front office, whatever it is. But again, my main issue with Paul George's podcast, it's not that he has one. I like active NBA players having podcasts. It's fun to watch, but it's that he tries to walk on eggshells and appease both sides and say certain things right in the middle. And then when he says something and it kind of offends this side or this side, whoever it is, and he can't just toe the line and keep everyone happy, and then someone has backlash to them, he's like, "Oh, you guys are so mean. Why don't you love my podcast?" Honestly, I think his podcast is pretty boring. He just has a bunch of like basic takes, but then he's famous. He had Dwight Howard on this last episode, and "Oh, you remember when Dwight Howard dunked on this guy? Oh, that was awesome, right? I'm in the NBA." It's like, bro, your podcast is not very entertaining. Just to be honest, in my opinion, you know what I mean? Like, you're great at basketball. People like to watch you play basketball. You make millions off of that, and then these players just get their egos inflated. I feel like you have such success in basketball, make so much money that you just think, yeah, I can just jump into entertainment, and I'll just be myself and be very entertaining. It's like you're in the NBA, so you're gonna get a following. Carmelo, Gilbert Arenas, these guys. We know your name. You're gonna get a following. Just off your name and your experience in the NBA. But when people like Paul George, they just get so butthurt when people criticize their podcast, and it just comes with it, man. Especially when you're an active NBA player. But yeah, that's my main issue with PG. Again, he was one of my favorite players in Indiana. 360 windmill dunks in games, just nasty playoff game winner over LeBron. He would just hit all sorts of clutch playoff shots in Indiana. And then he got paid and he got fat. Not literally fat, but he got paid. And then comment below what you think. But he just got lazy. He got to a point in his game where he just stopped working hard. He didn't keep developing his game, and now, he just digressed a bunch. It just is what it is. But back to the podcast. I like active players having one. But again, if you can't take the heat in the kitchen, like I said again, myself, I put stuff out there on YouTube. Same with Paul George, but when someone says they don't like my video or they don't like this opinion or that opinion, I just leave the comments up. It just is what it is. Everyone's not going to like me. And that's my problem with Paul George. He wants everyone to like him on this podcast. He just thinks everything's going to be positive on there, and just, I don't know what it is. And then, people see him on vacation, freaking licking his wife's boob and taking these crazy pictures. And I don't care about that either. Like, that's fine, but it's just such a bad look optically, especially for Philadelphia fans. They're the boobers. They're the most vocal fans. they're good fans. If you're doing great, they're gonna be there and they're gonna be loyal for you. But if you're doing stupid stuff and they feel like you're not doing all you can to be the best player you can be, they're gonna boo you and they're gonna let you know about it. Um, I honestly can't even think of a good example. Let me know if there's. I guess Draymond's a pretty good example. Draymond has his podcast. You know, he can handle both things. He can juggle the podcast with his NBA playing. His play style is always the same. It's not like Draymond's play is so much come down. He's always doing, kind of the glue guy stuff that he always does. But it's easier to be not a sixth man. Draymond's not a sixth man, but it's easier to not be the superstar player on the team and have a podcast. Because again, just like Paul George, people are gonna see you on your podcast. They're gonna pick apart every little thing you say on your podcast, especially when you're not playing well like Paul George. Again, it's Joel Embiid's fault the Sixers aren't playing very well because of his injuries and stuff. You can say he should keep himself in better shape, whatever it is. I just think he's injury prone, so it's really more his fault the Sixers are having a bad season. Then you just go up to the front office. They just don't make very good decisions. Drafting Embiid, knowing the injury risks he has, now it's come back to bite you. Trading so much to pick up Paul George, giving all these draft picks and stuff to pick up Paul George, and then you get him, and now like the writing was on the wall. The Clippers, a lot of people think they're not a greatly run organization, but they did not give Paul George the fourth year. They did not max him out. Paul George says, "That's an insult. The Clippers aren't grateful for the awesome player I am." And now look who was right. The Clippers were right. Paul George is in the back end of his contract and just not producing. Again, podcast is fine. Be an active player and have your podcast. But if you're not working hard and you're not improving your game, people are gonna say, I'm not one of those people. I don't think it's completely because of the podcast that he's not working hard, but I think he's not working hard and he does have a podcast. And people are gonna put those two things together, whether it's fair or not. But yeah, Playoff P is activated, shut down the podcast for the rest of the season. So we'll see if anything changes in his play style, and we'll see what happens. Please comment below what you think about, Podcast P having his podcast in the season. If you think that's a bad thing, again, I said my opinion. I think it's fine for active players to have a podcast, but you're in the kitchen, take the heat in the kitchen. Don't get all butthurt when people have opinions about your podcast and they pick things apart and say that was stupid and saying this was stupid because you're out on YouTube, you're out in the public. Just because you're famous and a decent basketball player, people aren't going to hear everything you say and just agree with it just because you're a current or an ex-NBA player. But yeah, I'm at a big 28 subscribers. Please like and subscribe. If you enjoyed the video, please comment below what you think about Podcast P, Playoff P as well, and just what you think about active players having NBA podcasts. See y'all again.